Chuck Norris was supposed to be indestructible. The man who could divide by zero and count to infinity twice simply vanished from Hollywood at the peak of his internet fame. No explanations, no farewell tours, just silence. For over a decade, fans wondered what happened to the action legend who once ruled the 80s and owned the early 2000s meme culture. The truth behind his disappearance is more shocking than any roundhouse kick he ever delivered. This isn't a story about retirement or fading stardom. This is about a man who discovered something more terrifying than any movie villain: watching the person you love slowly dying and being powerless to stop it. In 2013, Jenna O'Kelly walked into a medical facility for what should have been a routine checkup. She was the picture of health, the fit woman standing next to Chuck in those Total Gym infomercials, radiating vitality at 50 years old. She went in for 3 MRI scans over 8 days to check for rheumatoid arthritis. What happened next would destroy her life and force Chuck Norris to make an impossible choice. Within hours of that first injection, Jenna felt like her entire body was on fire. It felt like acid had been passed through it, she later revealed. The burning sensation started localized but spread relentlessly through her system. What began as discomfort quickly escalated into something far more sinister. Chuck rushed her to the emergency room that first night, but it was only the beginning of a nightmare that would consume the next 5 years of their lives. The hospitals had no answers. Visit after visit, Jenna's condition deteriorated while doctors ran test after test, coming up empty-handed. The burning pain intensified. Her cognitive function began failing. She couldn't think clearly, couldn't articulate thoughts, couldn't even remember basic things. Muscle wasting set in. Her body was systematically shutting down, and nobody could explain why. Chuck watched helplessly as his wife slipped away before his eyes. "Nothing's going on here. She's dying. She's dying right in front of me here at this hospital," he later told reporters. The woman who had been his partner, his co-star in commercials, his companion for nearly 2 decades, was becoming a shell of herself. For 5 months, Jenna was bedridden, requiring round-the-clock nursing care. Chuck slept on a couch beside her hospital bed, never leaving her side. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Through desperate research and consultation with alternative medicine practitioners, they discovered what they believed was the culprit: gadolinium. This heavy metal, injected as a contrast agent during MRI scans, was supposed to flush out of the body within hours. Instead, it had allegedly taken up permanent residence in Jenna's system, slowly poisoning her from the inside. The medical establishment insisted gadolinium was safe, that any connection to Jenna's symptoms was impossible. But testing revealed massive amounts of the substance still in her body years after those scans. Chuck and Jenna became convinced she was suffering from gadolinium deposition disease, a condition many doctors didn't even recognize existed. Their search for answers took them around the world. From clinics in Nevada to experimental treatments in China, Chuck spared no expense trying to save his wife's life. At one point, Jenna couldn't even swallow solid food and had to be fed like an infant. Her right arm was essentially paralyzed. The vibrant woman who once epitomized health and fitness had become a patient fighting for her life. The medical mystery that started with a routine health check had evolved into something that would challenge everything Chuck thought he knew about the healthcare system. And this was just the beginning of their battle. When the medical establishment failed them, Chuck Norris did what he does best: he fought back. In 2017, he declared war on some of the biggest names in healthcare, filing a $10 million lawsuit that sent shockwaves through the industry. This wasn't just about money. This was about exposing what they believed was a massive cover-up that had been poisoning patients for decades. The lawsuit targeted heavy hitters: McKesson Corporation, Bracco Imaging, and nearly a dozen other companies involved in manufacturing and distributing gadolinium-based contrast agents. Chuck and Jenna's legal team made explosive accusations that these companies knew about the risks but deliberately concealed them from patients and doctors. The filing claimed that gadolinium wasn't flushing out of bodies as promised, instead accumulating in organs like the brain, bones, and kidneys. The timing was perfect for maximum impact. The FDA was already investigating gadolinium safety, and patient advocacy groups were raising hell about similar cases. Chuck's celebrity status amplified everything. Suddenly, an issue that had been buried in medical journals was front-page news. The man who once fought fictional villains was now taking on real-world corporate giants. Jenna testified at FDA hearings, her voice shaking as she described her ordeal. "I went in for a routine MRI, checking for a positive rheumatoid factor, and during that time I was actually given 3 MRIs in the course of 8 days," she revealed. The hearing room fell silent as she detailed how the burning sensation spread through her body, how her cognitive abilities disappeared, how she nearly died. But here's where it gets interesting. The companies fought back hard. They had armies of lawyers and decades of safety data backing their products. Gadolinium-based contrast agents had been used in over 300 million patients since the late 1980s. The American College of Radiology stood behind the drugs, calling them crucial life-saving medical information tools. Chuck and Gina found themselves facing not just legal opposition, but scientific skepticism. Many doctors insisted that gadolinium deposition disease wasn't real, that the symptoms were psychosomatic or caused by other conditions. The couple was essentially claiming that an entire industry had been poisoning patients while regulatory agencies looked the other way. The case dragged on for years, consuming Chuck's time, energy, and resources. Court filings revealed they had already spent nearly $2 million out of pocket on Gina's treatments. The lawsuit sought to recover those costs and punish the companies for what they saw as negligent endangerment of public health. Then, in a shocking twist, Chuck voluntarily dropped the entire lawsuit in 2022. No settlement, no admission of wrongdoing, no money changing hands. Each side agreed to cover their own legal expenses and walk away. The announcement was brief and clinical, giving no insight into why the man who had spent years building his case suddenly abandoned it. Industry observers speculated wildly. Had Chuck been pressured to settle quietly? Did new evidence emerge that weakened his position? Or had the family simply grown tired of the endless legal battle while Gina's health slowly improved through alternative treatments? The truth behind the lawsuit's end remains a mystery, but its impact was undeniable. Patients worldwide now question their contrast agents before every scan. While Hollywood moved on without him, Chuck Norris was fighting the most important battle of his life and losing everything that had defined him for decades. The man who built an empire on being invincible was about to prove that real strength isn't about throwing punches. It's about giving up everything for someone you love. At the peak of his internet fame, when Chuck Norris facts were generating millions of laughs and lucrative endorsement deals, he made a decision that stunned Hollywood insiders. He walked away from it all. Movie offers, TV appearances, commercial deals, everything got turned down or canceled. Chuck had found something more important than fame, being Gina's full-time caregiver. The sacrifice was immediate and total. Chuck transformed from action star to nurse, learning to manage IV drips, monitor medications, and provide round-the-clock care. He slept on hospital couches for months, never leaving Gina's side even when doctors suggested he go home to rest. Chuck slept beside me on the couch and never left, Gina recalled. I prayed that I would live to raise my children. This wasn't a temporary hiatus. This was career suicide in an industry that quickly forgets yesterday's heroes. Chuck was 77 when Gina got sick, an age when most action stars are already struggling to find roles. By choosing to disappear for what became over a decade, he was essentially ending his Hollywood career. Agents stopped calling, scripts stopped arriving. The entertainment industry moved on without Chuck Norris. The financial cost was staggering. Beyond the nearly $2 million in medical expenses, Chuck was turning down millions in potential earnings. The total gym infomercials that had been a steady income stream for decades, Gina could no longer participate, and Chuck refused to do them alone. Endorsement deals that capitalized on Chuck Norris facts? He had no time or energy for marketing meetings, but the emotional toll was even heavier. Chuck watched his wife, a woman 23 years younger, who had been vibrant and healthy, struggle to perform basic functions. At her worst, Gina couldn't swallow solid food, couldn't move her right arm, and couldn't think clearly. Chuck had to feed her baby food and help her with everything from bathing to walking. The couple's search for treatment became Chuck's full-time job. He researched experimental therapies, flew Gina to clinics around the world, and coordinated with doctors who were willing to think outside conventional medicine. When traditional treatments failed, Chuck embraced controversial alternatives like chelation therapy and stem cell treatments. Some medical professionals criticized these choices, but Chuck didn't care. He was willing to try anything. Friends and family watched in amazement as the ultimate tough guy revealed his softest side. The man famous for karate chops and roundhouse kicks was now gentle hands helping his wife through her darkest hours. Chuck later admitted that caring for Gina taught him more about real strength than any martial arts training ever had. Years passed with no improvement, then gradual progress. Gina's symptoms slowly receded, though she never fully returned to her previous health. Chuck remained devoted, patient, and present through every setback and small victory. By the time Gina was stable enough for Chuck to even consider working again, he had been out of the spotlight for over a decade. The entertainment landscape had completely changed, and Chuck Norris had become a memory. After 12 years of silence, Chuck Norris decided to return to the one thing he knew best, kicking butt on camera. But his 2024 comeback proved that time hadn't been kind to the 84-year-old legend, and Hollywood had moved on without him. The movie was called Agent Recon, a low-budget sci-fi action flick that should have been Chuck's triumphant return. Instead, it became a painful reminder of how far he'd fallen from his Delta Force and Walker Texas Ranger glory days. Chuck played Alistair, the leader of a covert security task force hunting aliens in New Mexico. On paper, it sounded like classic Chuck Norris material. Tough guys, military action, and plenty of opportunities for his signature moves. But something was terribly wrong from the moment filming began. The production was so small it only employed 10 people. The director Derek Ting also wrote the script and starred as the lead character, billing himself above Chuck Norris in the credits. That should have been the first red flag that this wasn't the comeback vehicle Chuck deserved. When Agent Recon hit streaming platforms in June 2024, the reviews were absolutely brutal. Fans who had waited over a decade to see their hero back in action were horrified by what they witnessed. Chuck appeared on screen for maybe 10 minutes total, spending most of that time sitting still and reading dialogue like he was seeing the script for the first time. His once intimidating presence had been reduced to an elderly man struggling through obvious cue cards. The action sequences were even worse. When Chuck finally got to fight, it looked exactly like what it was: an 84-year-old man trying to recapture his youth. The famous martial arts skills that once made him legendary were replaced by stiff movements and unconvincing choreography. One particularly painful scene showed Chuck firing an endless stream of bullets from a minigun with no visible ammunition belt, defying both physics and common sense. Critics weren't kind. One reviewer wrote, "Chuck Norris deserved better than this. This film is an insult to Chuck Norris and deeply upsetting to his fans." Another called it the worst movie that I have ever watched, and suggested Chuck must be really hard up for cash to attach his name to such a disaster. The film currently holds a devastating 2.4 rating on IMDb. But Chuck wasn't done fighting. Despite the Agent Recon debacle, he had already signed on for another project that sounded even more ridiculous, a horror comedy called Zombie Plane co-starring Vanilla Ice. The premise involves Chuck and the rapper playing exaggerated versions of themselves while fighting zombies on an airplane. Early reports promised 90s nostalgia and a wild ride, which in Hollywood speak usually means prepare for another disaster. The tragedy of Chuck's comeback wasn't just the poor quality of his projects, it was seeing a legend reduced to bottom-tier productions that exploited his name without respecting his legacy. After sacrificing over a decade of his career for love, Chuck was discovering that Hollywood had no interest in welcoming him back with dignity. His first film in 12 years had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of staying away too long. While Chuck struggled with his failed comeback, the internet kept trying to kill him off. Multiple celebrity death hoaxes targeted the 84-year-old legend throughout 2023 and 2024, forcing him to repeatedly prove he was still breathing. But the real tragedy wasn't the fake news, it was the genuine loss that actually devastated his family. The death hoaxes followed a predictable pattern. Social media posts would claim Chuck had died from various causes: heart attacks, strokes, COVID complications. Fake RIP Facebook pages would rack up hundreds of thousands of likes before fact-checkers could respond. The most persistent hoax claimed he had passed away at 11 a.m. on a Monday morning, providing just enough detail to fool gullible fans into sharing the fake news. These weren't harmless pranks, they were calculated attempts to drive traffic to scam websites. The hoaxes always emerged when Chuck was making headlines for other reasons, like his Agent Recon release or health updates about Gina. Snopes and other fact-checking sites had to repeatedly debunk these stories, explaining that reputable news outlets like the Associated Press would have covered Chuck's actual death. Chuck's representatives grew tired of constantly denying his demise. He joins the long list of celebrities who have been victimized by this hoax. They stated after one particularly viral fake death announcement, "He's still alive and well. Stop believing what you see on the internet." But the hoaxes kept coming, sometimes multiple times per year. The cruel irony was that while the internet kept falsely mourning Chuck, he was dealing with genuine grief. In December 2024, his beloved mother Wilma passed away at the remarkable age of 1003. This was real heartbreak, not internet fiction. Wilma had been Chuck's anchor through everything: his difficult childhood, his rise to fame, and especially during Gina's health crisis. When Chuck announced her death on social media, his pain was raw and genuine. "Wednesday morning, my brother Aaron and I's wonderful mother went home to be with Jesus," he wrote, sharing photos of them together over the decades. "Our mom was a woman of unwavering faith, a beacon of light in our lives." Chuck's tribute revealed just how much his mother meant to him. She had raised 3 boys alone after Chuck's father abandoned the family, surviving the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and decades of poverty. She had outlived 2 husbands, multiple grandchildren, and Chuck's brother Wyland, who died in Vietnam. At 103, she was the last survivor of her 11-member biological family. The timing was particularly cruel. Just as Chuck was trying to rebuild his career, and Gina was finally showing signs of recovery, he lost the woman who had supported him through everything. Fans who had been fooled by fake death announcements for years suddenly found themselves offering genuine condolences for an actual loss. The contrast was stark. The internet had cried wolf so many times about Chuck's death that when real tragedy struck his family, the authentic grief got lost among all the false alarms. Chuck was learning that fame in the digital age meant your real pain competed with manufactured drama for attention. Now at 84, having buried his mother and nursed his wife back to health, Chuck faced an uncertain future in an industry that seemed more interested in exploiting his legend than respecting the man behind it. Today, at 84 years old, Chuck Norris lives a life that would be unrecognizable to fans who only know him through action movies and internet jokes. The man who once defined masculinity for an entire generation has found peace in a much quieter existence, far from Hollywood's spotlight and social media's constant noise. Chuck and Gina now spend their time on their Texas ranch, where the pace of life moves slower and the priorities are clearer. They take weekend camping trips by rivers, fishing for their dinner and reconnecting with nature. It's a far cry from movie sets and red carpets, but Chuck describes it as the most fulfilling period of his life. Chuck and Gina do everything together, a family friend revealed. He pampers her with gifts and affection and remains completely devoted to her recovery. The couple recently celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary, a milestone that takes on deeper meaning considering they nearly lost each other during Gina's health crisis. Sources close to the family say Chuck wants 2025 to be their most special year yet, focusing on making memories rather than making movies. After spending over a decade as Gina's caregiver, Chuck has learned to appreciate simple moments that he once took for granted. But Chuck hasn't completely disappeared from public life. He maintains an active social media presence, sharing photos from family gatherings and expressing his political views through his nationally syndicated column. His posts often feature his trademark humor, though they're noticeably more focused on family values and faith than the aggressive persona that made him famous. The Chuck Norris facts phenomenon that exploded in the 2000s now feels like a relic from another era. While the jokes about his impossible strength and omnipotence still circulate online, Chuck himself seems more interested in discussing real-world issues like veteran affairs and Christian values. He's become less of a mythical figure and more of a grandfather figure, sharing wisdom instead of roundhouse kicks. His recent comeback attempts suggest Chuck isn't entirely ready to retire, but he's clearly selective about his projects. Beyond the disappointing Agent Recon, he's still attached to Zombie Plane with Vanilla Ice, though no release date has been announced. These choices suggest Chuck understands his current market value. He's no longer a leading man, but rather a nostalgic novelty act. The transformation from action hero to devoted husband and caregiver reveals the real Chuck Norris character. Behind all the tough guy posturing and martial arts mastery was a man capable of profound sacrifice and unlimited patience. His decision to abandon his career for Gina's health showed a kind of strength that no movie role could ever demonstrate. Perhaps that's the real lesson of Chuck Norris's story. The internet made him into a superhuman meme, capable of doing impossible things and defying natural laws. But the truth is more powerful than any fictional fact. Chuck Norris proved that real heroes don't always fight monsters or save the world. Sometimes they just hold someone's hand through the darkest night and refuse to let go, even when it costs them everything else. At 84, Chuck Norris may not be able to divide by zero, but he's accomplished something far more impressive. He's learned what actually matters when everything else fades away.